Yo.
Hey, hello, hello.
Hello,
Hey,
can you hear us
hello.
all?
Yeah, I can hear all two of you. Are there more of you?
Well, there are two of us as the hosts, and then we got Ben behind the camera there.
Yeah, I'm the producer. I'm just gonna not be talking, so don't worry about me.
Oh, okay, gotcha. How are you guys doing this wonderful morning, afternoon?
Dude, pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, it is afternoon, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm doing well.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for
Strange.
having us on the show here. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on or having me on or whatever it is you guys do.
Yeah, whatever
Any
we're doing
combination
here.
thereof.
Do you guys want to introduce yourselves and who you guys are, what you're about?
Yeah,
Sure.
sure. Sounds good. I'm Richard Glenn. Are our voices going to sound different enough for anyone to know who's talking when?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
All right. Well, I'm Richard Glenn. I am a co-host on the Spiritable podcast, obviously. I am currently finishing up in theological school. I'm training to be a minister.
Mhm.
I will be finished this spring, and whether I will have a graduation ceremony is very
Remains to be
dubious at this
seen.
point. I probably will not, but that's fine. I didn't work hard or anything, whatever.
And my name is Luke David. I'm an actor, and I also produce church media. So I do videography and audio and all that sort of thing. And we started the Spiritable podcast about a year ago to kind of just bring spirituality down to earth, because we feel like a lot of times it's taboo to talk about religion or belief or faith. And we kind of wanted to break those barriers and change it up a little bit.
Okay. I think I can give you a camera. Do you want a camera for me?
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
that'd
sure,
be
that'd be great.
fun.
Hold on one second.
Yeah, we got a whole good tech setup going here.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, so my name is Stephen Bonel. I go by Destiny Online. It was a gamer handle that I used a long time ago, and I just kind of stuck. I talk about politics and philosophy, and then I play video games, and that's kind of what I'm about right now.
Nice.
Let me make sure I got the right camera selected. Hold on one sec. How long have you guys been doing this for?
This is our second season of the show.
Season 2, baby. We started in August of
Technically.
2018, 2019?
Yeah.
We did some trials, and then we've had about a year of episodes. We're going on, like 35 or something like that. So, our feet are wet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's been fun. It's definitely been tough to figure out how to make religion and spirituality accessible to people, because not a lot of people want to tune into that. And so it's kind of a game we're trying to change a little bit. It can be tough to do.
Yeah, for sure.
But we definitely have stuff that we want to talk to you about. But we want to let you take the reins here.
Well, how about how about you guys take the reins? Because
right,
there's
let's do it.
obviously there's two huge. We can discuss like religion broadly. I guess like the role that you guys would hope that religion would play in a person's life, or we could specifically talk about theology. Like God and that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's kind of it's up to you guys. Or I can go any direction you guys want to go.
Sick.
Well, we normally start the show with a thing we call spiritual icebreakers, which are sometimes more spiritual and sometimes less.
Mhm.
All right,
Luke's
let's
got
hit you
a
with it.
list of those.
Okay, spiritual icebreakers. Just break the conversation.
Okay.
All right, right off the bat, is it worse to kill a puppy or an ant?
Oh man. Oof.
You have this switch.
Sure.
What do you do?
Is it worse to kill a puppy or an ant? So I would say it's worse to kill the puppy.
Okay, I would
Why?
agree with that, but why?
So if we were to construct any type of moral system, and we were to try to take a value statement about like how we should grant moral consideration to other things, I would imagine that we would probably start with things that have an experience that's more similar to our own. So other people obviously are the most similar, and then from there we would go to like mammals, so like cows and sheep and dogs and cats have an experience that's quite similar. So a dog would be like a creature that would have an experience that's quite similar to our own, and then further removed from that you get to things like insects that it's hard to know if they have an experience that's even remotely resembling like what a human experience is. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, I like it. It does kind of
cool, yeah.
paint kind of a selfish picture of humanity, just like, because I would answer the same way, but it is like us not wanting to exterminate the thing that relates to us the most. So
Yeah.
Well, I would answer also it's worse to kill a puppy, but I would say my moral measure is more on the effect it has on the person doing it.
than the actual thing.
Like I definitely would have more baggage from killing a puppy than I would from killing an ant. I have killed ants. I have not killed a puppy, and I can't imagine the baggage I would carry from doing that. It would be quite sad. So I think for that reason, it would be morally worse for me because it would hinder my usefulness in the world to kill a puppy.
Sure. Both of you have very interesting answers. Wait, can you give me both of your names? I've got guy on the right and guy on the left.
I'm Luke in the dark gray sweater.
Luke?
I'm Richard.
Okay. So it's very interesting, Luke, that you brought up that it was kind of a my answer was a little bit self-centered, and that I'm going by what, or yeah, that I'm going by like what is, how do we relate to things, and that's how we kill things, or decide like what we can kill or can't kill, right?
Right.
So we have a hard time killing other people. We have a hard time killing animals that can yelp or whatever. I'm interested in I mean, like, arguably, the reason why we have this feeling is due to I imagine you would say our God-given empathy, right? Our ability to empathize and understand other creatures. It seems to be a really important tool that's granted to us as people. You would say divinely in terms of figuring out, like, what's right and wrong. I wonder if you would say that's a good or bad foundation for figuring out intuitively as humans what's right or wrong, ignoring things like the Ten Commandments or whatnot.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I would say empathy is something uniquely given by God. I think, in so much as in our worldview, God is the foundation of everything, sure. But I think a lot of different things have a level of empathy. We just have our own sort of human experience of empathy.
Okay, cool. And then for the other guy, so it was Lucas and other name?
Luke and Richard.
Richard, okay. For Richard's answer... and then we don't have to do philosophy for long. It's fun to talk about.
No, it's great, man.
Because I know you can get lost in the weeds in this. It can get really boring really quick. You mentioned that the thing that would be most likely to be killed by you would be the thing that would have the least impact negatively on you. So between a puppy and an ant, you would suffer a greater personal consequence killing the puppy than the ant. I'm curious. You probably wouldn't extend this to other people though, if their personal problems with killing things didn't match with your own, right? So, for instance, if we were to find a hypothetical psychopath who was very uncomfortable killing bugs, but was more comfortable killing other people, we probably wouldn't let him get away with that same answer, right? Like, I would rather kill people than bugs because I really don't enjoy, tormenting poor ants that are just trying to do their colony, but I am okay with killing evil humans that should know better than to get in my way or something, right?
Yeah, I have a probably fairly... unpopular opinion on the morality of animals that generally makes my friends unhappy. I kind of over the top will say that I think animals are basically like little meat robots. And I say that to be flippant and more aggressive than I need to be. But what I mean by that is that I think that morality is within the realm of humanity. I think that morality in general is a human thing. Like, no one calls a lion a jackass for killing a gazelle. It's like, oh, that's nature. Like, I don't know. It's nature does nature things. And we only apply the moral lens when we are looking at humanity. So I think in that sense, it is innately tied to humanity, what is moral and what is not, and its effect on humanity. And so I think with a person killing a person, now there is moral weight to that implicitly. And I think with the death of an animal, the moral weight is its effect on humanity, which in my worldview is the realm in which morality lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm curious if I ever use a term that you need me to define or whatever, just because I know people say a lot of different things. Yeah, let me know. Would you, for Richard, right?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Would you say this sounds kind of like consequentialist? Have you ever heard that term before? Or oh yeah. Okay. So you tend to evaluate the good or bad of any given action based on the outcome and its impact towards humanity or any given human. Is that kind of like how you view things?
I think that consequentialism is a tool we can use to judge the good or bad of a situation, but it isn't the innate value of it. Like I said, I think if I killed a person who was just generally mean and added nothing to the world, it would still be a bad thing that I killed a human being. Right? It still wouldn't be good that I did that innately, even if maybe his death made the world a better place. It wouldn't be good for me to have done that. What? And that gets in a whole interesting thing about like how bad, like, would I kill Hitler? Blah, blah, blah. That whole kind of issue. that muddies the water. But in general, I don't think it's like whether you get to stay alive is based on your worth and usefulness in the world. I think that people have innate value, and we can sort of see whether something is good or not by its effect on the world, but that isn't always an accurate measure.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was a good little spiritual icebreaker. I'm into that.
I like that.
I'd love to. I haven't heard a ton about your specific religious experience, so if it's all right, I'd like to ask a question about that. Feel free to say no and move on to.
I'm pretty open about everything in my life, so knock yourself out.
Cool. Yeah, what I watched a couple of your videos and that kind of thing, and what I basically grasped was that you grew up Catholic and didn't have a great experience. So I was wondering if you have anything that stands out to you as your kind of worst experience with organized religion, and also if you had any like standout best experiences with organized religion.
So I grew up very Catholic, and I went to a Catholic private grade school, and then I went to a Catholic private high school. So the teaching order of the Catholic Church are called the Jesuits. So I went to a Jesuit high school. My grade school experience was basically every bad trope you hear about Catholics. Everything sexual is evil, and our sex ed is literally pictures of like rotting genitals falling off, and if you have sex with one person, it's like having sex with 1 million people, and like just like a lot of like really very hardcore like do or die, very, very, very extreme stuff. I don't know, man, to scare kids or whatever, but like, yeah, it painted a pretty, I'll use this term. It painted a very Old Testament picture of God, I guess. Very brutal, very harsh. My Jesuit high school was a much better experience. I was Catholic going for the first half of my Jesuit high school, but even being more secular or atheist or irreligious in my later half of high school, I would say that my Jesuit high school experience very much got away from like the hard line religious ideology of God, and more of like, what is the idea of Jesus and how can we live that in our everyday life? We had a lot of slogans like brothers for others and stuff like this. A lot of our religious teachings and our religious classes were more like, how can we take examples of Jesus and things that Jesus have done and you know, sermons and all of that, and how do we apply this in our everyday lives, you know, with the struggles that we go through as teenagers, with the struggles of you know, managing relationships and friends and school, and how do we respect our parents and ourselves, and how do we like, so I liked the experience that I had in high school related to religion. The grade school experience was not that good. I don't know how important either of those were.
No, those are great.
Yeah, in terms of shaping my being a religious now, but yeah.
Yeah, so what changed for you post high school?
Well, you said you became more a-religious in the middle of high school, right? And it's interesting that you became more a-religious as you had better religious experience.
Yeah, I don't think that the religious experience at all was necessarily indicative of whether or not I would change my mind on that. I think it's more just you guys being religious, this is going to sound really dismissive, but my current understanding is that like, I don't think that any type of theology will stand to relentless scrutiny, and that as you kind of go through life and grow up and you ask more and more questions, things don't really make sense. The way that the physical world doesn't seem to align as much with the stories that we're told theologically, and there's less and less of reason to believe in any of the fantastical stuff or supernatural stuff that are given in any religious text, so you kind of stray from it as a result of that. And that's kind of why I started to drift away when I was like 15, 16, 17.
Okay, interesting. So what do you do with experiences that people have that seem to be beyond natural circumstance, like any paranormal activity or any like extra spiritual interaction, like a near-death experience or an after-death visitation? Because that's always been something for me personally, that when I'm in like a period of doubt or wondering about my beliefs, coming back to these sort of universally shared spiritual experiences that people have, of, you know, visiting someone after they've died, or having someone who's dead visit you, or having a near-death experience, or even like night terrors are super interesting, sleep paralysis. So there are all these like universal spiritual experiences, and I'm wondering how you reconcile those.
I mean, our brains are like very, very powerful machines.
For sure.
I would say that like we have a very shared biology, obviously, in terms of the actual like the chemical makeup of all of our bodies and the organs we have. And then we have a lot of shared experiences in society. So it wouldn't surprise me that in times of great stress or under the influence of certain drugs, especially, that we would have some type of shared or common experience. If anything, I would think it would be abnormal if people were to have near-death experiences and all of them were to describe, dramatically different things. I think that because we have so much shared biology and so much shared experience in society, it makes sense to me that under certain circumstances, people would start to envision or imagine different things. Now, obviously, you're going to reach levels of supernatural phenomenon that are inexplainable in that. So people that, claim to witness miracle healings or see things that are unexplainable or whatever. And for these types of things, I mean, I would usually default to the idea that I just don't believe it. Like, I'm expressing a healthy level of skepticism. There's no way you can validate what I'm saying. I kind of appeal to the idea that, like, once cell phones and cell phone video became more popular, it was a lot harder to get saints canonized for the Catholic Church. Because in order to be canonized as a saint in the Catholic Church, I think you have to have 2 confirmed miracles, I believe. It's either 1 or 2 confirmed miracles, and those seem to stop happening pretty quickly as soon as we got video of everything going on in real life. But,
well, I mean, to be frank, I'm not an overt believer in modern miracles as they were in like the Old Testament. I just don't think we can have that no splitting of the Red Sea anymore, really.
Sure.
Yeah, I would define myself as a fairly skeptical person, which I think surprises a lot of people coming from a background of my vocation will be a minister in my life. And one thing that my brother...
He's kind of an ass, basically, is what we're trying to say.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Cool. Anybody that willingly calls himself skeptical is always an asshole. That's 100%. That includes atheists, too, so yeah, go ahead, sorry.
One thing that I come back to fairly often, and this is something my brother originally said that I have very much taken on, is I think that either I would be just the most invested in the faith that I'm currently in, or I would be very, very strongly atheistic. Just because I do have a lot of skepticism around the experience of other ideology and spiritual experiences like that. And I try to stay open-minded to people's experience, but I think I am naturally a fairly analytical and skeptical person. And that being said, it's been fascinating for me to have worked through a period of really extreme doubt in my life where I was like, oh, actually, I think that religion and the belief in an afterlife is a crock of shit that people came up with because they're scared about death and about the meaninglessness of existence. And I was that way for a while. And while I was that way, I basically was like, oh, but this faith practice that I've grown up in, apart from this whole phony God idea, actually is a pretty useful philosophy for me being happy in my life. So I'm going to keep chugging along with this. And kind of over time, seeing it as a philosophy more and more, I was like, ooh, I don't think a person could have come up with this stuff. I think this is beyond the wisdom that a human can possess. And that's sort of why I am a person of faith still. But it's interesting to hear from you that your religious experience had very little about your final worldview decision. Because what I hear from a lot of people, especially people that grew up with a very structured, organized religion, is their reason that they are no longer religious is almost every time that I've experienced tied to a negative experience with faith.
Yeah, I think it's really important in life for everybody to not be reactionary. There are a lot of communities, especially, or people that I have like negative experiences with. But I try when you reject something that you have a negative experience with, and then you define yourself as the negative, you're essentially still allowing the experience to define you, just in an opposite manner. You hear a lot of people, I used to be in favor of X politician until like their fans bullied me, and now I've taken on the positions of every single thing that the opposite believes, and it's like, damn, it seems like you never really believed in anything that much then. If that was all it took.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
Yeah, that's. I think that's a really important thing.
That's one thing we've said on our podcast a whole bunch, is that we encourage people to rigorously question their own beliefs, because even just growing up in a certain faith system or cultural system, it's hard for you to see out of that and get a different kind of perspective. So actively taking steps to remove yourself from what your belief is and examine it from the outside, even though you're never going to be totally objective. Still a really useful practice to do, I think, for just like self-betterment and self-happiness long term.
Sure.
Yeah, one quote that I often come back to, and I first heard this from, are you familiar with the comedian, musician Tim Minchin?
You love Tim Minchin.
Luke's going to groan because I talk about Tim Minchin all the time.
Yeah, I used to watch his stuff. I don't know if he's still active, but back in high school, I remember watching stuff. He does like a lot of like spoken word comedy, music stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen, yeah.
He gave a like college graduation address that's awesome, very inspirational, would recommend. And the thing he says in it that stuck with me is the ideas that we should be most aggressive toward are our own.
Sure.
And he says like take them out on the veranda and beat them with a bat. And I like that because I think that we tend to be hyper aggressive toward things outside of ourselves and very forgiving and unscrutinizing of our own belief. Because we believe it. Why we need to re-examine it. And so I think that this links to your idea of like, well, those people were mean to me, so now my beliefs are different. To me, shows a very unreflective belief system.
Sure. Wait, can you repeat that last part again? I'm sorry.
To me, this idea of changing your belief system based on how other people have affected you that have that belief shows a belief system that was not very well reflected on.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I thought I heard you. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. That if you're so easy and so quick to jump to something different, then it seems like whatever you initially believed, then you must not have believed that much at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's all belief in general, whether it's religion or politics or philosophy or whatever. Like take some steps to actively question it. I wanted to go back to kind of universal human experiences in the more like spiritual realm or whatever.
Sure.
Back like a more basic step. What is your not reasoning or worldview explanation for consciousness or self-actualization? Because that's something today that feels uniquely human, verging on spiritual. So I'm curious where that comes from in your worldview.
So the only place I've heard self-actualization used is from Maslow. Is it when you say self-actualization, what do you mean by that? Just so I understand.
I can think about what I'm thinking about, essentially.
Sure. That kind of like meta consciousness. I can't give you a good. I can't explain consciousness.
Like trap you, man. I'm just
no. Yeah, I understand. It's a really hard problem. In terms of us saying that it's uniquely human. I mean, unless we're going to take like some solipsistic take towards like animals, it seems as though animals have conscious experiences that must be somewhat similar to humans. They have similar brain structure, and they seem to act in a way that would be indicative maybe of conscious experiences. So I don't know if I would say that conscious experience is uniquely human. Maybe the level of thought that we have, or the level of cognition we have, or rationality that we have, or our ability to, like, I think a couple things that humans do is we have language and we can describe things that aren't happening in the here and now, or like two like really big things that we're able to do. So we can talk about events in the future that aren't happening yet. And then we can communicate using like really complicated symbols or language. That's really good. But I mean, in terms of like how we explain it, I mean, like obviously humans are unique. We're humans. Like, I mean, apes are unique and dogs are unique and cats are unique. But I mean, humans seem to be the farthest we got in the evolutionary chain for mammals until we started to develop tools and everything, and then kind of like froze society in place in terms of like where we're at in evolution right now, I guess.
Yeah. Cool. All right. That's interesting.
But would you see, so you talked about like humans are unique, dogs are unique, cats are unique. Would you see there be a kind of a different level of distinction between humans and the rest of living things?
I don't think I would group like humans and the rest of living things. I think
humans and the rest of mammals.
Yeah, I mean, like humans are definitely like part of the group of mammals, but we also seem to be like the best of them for sure. I mean, obviously, I would say. I mean, and then you've got like reptiles, you've got sea creatures, you've got like all other ways of like breaking things out, depending on how you want to argue. I forget the science of it's not. Oh God, it's not taxidermy. Taxology. I think is what I'm looking for. Yeah, taxonomy or taxonomy. I think. Yeah. I mean, like, there's how you decide you want to split things up. Of course. I mean, obviously, I would push back against the idea that humans are like ultra unique. I mean, like biologically, we have tons of similarities and overlaps with every other mammal.
Yeah,
it just
like
seems
90% of banana or something.
Well, yeah, depending on which parts of the genome you want to compare. Yeah, but like I mean, like, obviously, in terms of mind, right, we seem to possess a superior mind to any other creature. That seems to be the case. So we would be unique in that sense, and I would obviously recognize that, yeah.
So
But I mean, even if you look at lifestyle, like
Mhm.
I would say that we are more distinct from other mammals than mammals are from reptiles, for example.
Well, it depends on what you mean by lifestyle. Like, because our lifestyle right now is largely a product of our environment that's been molded over many, many generations, right? Our lifestyles in the past were probably pretty similar to the lifestyles of other types of mammals, right? We moved around in groups, we picked plants and berries and ate them, and then we kind of hunted things as we moved around, and we did that lifestyle, which is similar to probably like big cats. Like I think tigers, lions, and stuff move around in like big prides or herds, and like they hunt things, and I don't know if they eat plants or not. But like, yeah. So, I mean, I don't think we're that unique in terms of lifestyle. Where we've reached now, we are, of course. But then I would also say that like a house cat or a house dog is pretty unique in lifestyle too. Like cats literally, go poop and pee in boxes that sometimes clean themselves and empty themselves. Like that's pretty unique compared to where
But
they
they're
were.
they're only unique because of us, right? That's a result of us that they are unique. If we never domesticated animals, they would be no different. So I don't know if that distinction can really be separated from a human distinction, or if it's instead kind of a reinforcement of how distinct humanity is.
Oh yeah, I mean the only distinction I'm drawing is I'm saying that like I don't think it's fair to compare our modern day lifestyle to the lifestyle that other mammals have like in wilderness areas right now, because we only live the lifestyle we have because we've built upon like generations of human knowledge. It's not like the natural state of human isn't to be sitting at a computer working for 8 hours a day and then driving a car home. Like we're very much like products of our environment now, more so than just this is biologically what humans do, I would say.
Well, I get that, but I think our environment, I think we built our environment, and that's what makes humans so distinct, is that we have been able to shape our environment and grow. And this passing on of knowledge idea, I think, is a huge separation between humanity and the rest of any living thing. A dog doesn't share the knowledge with its pups that they then avoid the problems that their parents ran into and grow and change and adapt like humanity does.
Yeah, for sure. That's the cognitive parts there. Our ability to pass information on, to communicate with complicated language and symbols is definitely unique to us. In terms of being able to teach tools, I believe that there are groups of animals. I want to say a form of ape, and I think elephants have been seen where they can use a tool and they'll teach other people to use
I've
a tool.
seen elephants paint.
Yeah, and I think they can spread that knowledge to the tribe. But to do it at the level of sophistication that we have is uniquely human. Like we were the ones that got to that first.
So would you say that's just like chance that it happened for humans? Develop in this much of an exponential way?
Chance is a very human word.
Yeah.
We so another big gift that we have is the ability to recognize patterns. So we like to project patterns sometimes where there are none. Like if I drop a rock on the floor, one way we could look at that is like where the rock lands. Well, that's chance. It could land anywhere, but it landed in one particular spot. And there was no real chance involved. Like the rock fell a certain way, and then it landed in a certain way. There wasn't really chance there, but we would describe it as chance. Right? It's like, oh yeah, you dropped the rock, and hey, it fell there. Like if it fell in the middle of a bullseye, we'd say like, wow, that was lucky. Low chance of that happening. But I mean, like we can use chance, but when we're describing like the flow of time, things happen as they do. So when we look at things like, I don't know where you guys stand in terms of like evolution or natural selection, but as an atheist, obviously, I buy into the theory of evolution. When we look at like where the human mind is developed, if you ask me like, well, was this chance? I mean, I would say, well, no. I mean, like over a long series of time, different phenotypes have been chosen that are advantageous in certain environments because they allow you to breed more. And this is just the end product of that chain of like selective pressure, basically. So, I mean, you can call it chance. I mean, but I wouldn't really use the word chance to say that. Yeah, sorry.
Sure. No, that's a fair distinction.
Yeah, I was actually just talking about with your question about evolution. I was just talking about this the other day with some of my classmates and one of my professors. This idea of where our faith or my faith generally stands on the evolution idea is basically it fully subscribes to Darwinian theory of evolution until you get to the idea that the mutations and changes were random, because we would say that or my faith, as I understand it, says that there is no such thing as true randomness, that everything is guided in some way by God. And so evolution was guided to create the human form because it was the end of the goal of creation in general, for humanity to be created, to be able to communicate and exist with God.
Yeah, for sure.
So full support of evolution
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned, except God did it. Nice.
Yeah, this trips up a lot of young theologists, I would say, or like people, like very young people. Like, how can we have free will if God knows everything that's going to happen? He's already made the choice for me. Well, just because if you were to grant divine wisdom to a God, just because he knows the choice you're going to make doesn't make it your choice any less than that, right?
100%.
Yeah, and then much the same that like we could still believe that we live in a divinely inspired universe that's been crafted and created by God. Evolution or natural selection, or any part of evolution, could very much be a tool that God uses to create humans. That's not spoken about in as much detail in Genesis, but yeah, I mean, that could be a tool of God nonetheless. So we could argue that evolution exists as a process. Humans were the end product of that. Now, what appears random to a scientist might have been a guided process by God, but a scientist could accurately describe all of the underlying mechanisms just as well as they could, and that could still be a process that was divinely inspired, right?
Yeah, because basically the way I see it is the natural order that scientists work under is an order that God created and works within for the sake of our freedom, right? Like if science suddenly became really inconsistent and there were widely recognized, unable to be disproven miracles, it would not be in the realm of human freedom to believe or not believe in God. And then basically wouldn't be human because in my opinion, humans are defined by their freedom of choice and their reason. And that's what to me makes them distinct. And so we live in a realm of science where things can be tracked to science, because if they couldn't, we'd be like, well, guess there has to be something else going on.
And I do think a lot of Christians fall into, or the stereotypical Christian falls into a trap of trying to push back against scientific research in general, science in general, because it was sort of a reactionary thing to Enlightenment to be devoid of science and to retract away from that. And I think that just is a disservice to religion to say that science is wrong and God is right, when why can't they both be right?
Yeah.
For me, at the end of the day, at least.
I feel like it just gives religion a bad name. And the interesting thing is that I'm not totally clear on this. My church history is not the best. But I'm fairly sure that the prevalence of biblical what's the word I'm looking for here? Like the actual factual history. Yeah, biblical literalism.
Okay.
Was not very common in early Christianity, and that basically all of the big church leaders saw the beginning of Genesis as allegorical and like myth creation stories.
That's probably a good distinction for our religion comparative to other Christianity, is that a lot of what the stories in the Bible we see as allegories or having a deeper meaning and not necessarily being factually true. Like Adam and Eve, we don't believe actually existed. That's a story with a deeper meaning, that sort of thing.
And we do believe that like Abraham through the New Testament were all things that actually happened. But through that is also told like a deeper message for our spiritual life is a big tenet of the faith that we're both a part of.
Swedenborgianism, general church, whatever you want to call it.
So here I'll do some atheist prodding. So let me pontificate.
Slam us, we're ready
for a second. So earlier, you mentioned something very interesting. Obviously, a while ago, it seemed very hard for religious people to reconcile their beliefs with science. And then in this we're in this newer age of Christianity where I think the Pope even came out did the Pope say recently, like in the past 10 years, that he was okay with was it evolution or something? I don't remember. It was something, but I know that like even the Catholic Church, I think, has like modernized its views on certain scientific topics or whatever. I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but regardless, like Christians in general seem to be more amenable today to like scientific arguments or scientific answers to questions, and then say that, well, actually, this works alongside our religion. Like we don't have to be 6,000-year-old like young Earth creationists in order to maintain our faith in God. So one of the things that I wonder about this is, I'm sure you've heard, I'm making a small argument of like the God of the gaps. I think one of the problems that people have is that religion used to explain so many more parts of our lives, or myth in general used to explain so many more parts of our lives. But as we've investigated more and more and more of these parts, the answers that we've come away with have always been scientific or physical rather than religious or immaterial. That there's never been a question that we've investigated where it's like, hey, what's going on with human disease? Are we possessed by demons? Do we only have 4 fluids in our body? Are these out of whack? What's going on? Like, the answers to these questions have never been some immaterial or theological thing. It's always been some physical or material thing that we can investigate scientifically. And I feel like that's why people are kind of nervous to give ground on their religion, because it's like, well, today we say that, the sun doesn't come up because God says it is. Tomorrow we say the earth's not the center of the universe. Like, who knows what we're going to be seeding, a year from now or 10 years from now or 100 years from now.
Yeah. Can I respond?
Yeah, go for
it. So I have sort of 2 responses to that. The first is that I think churches, again, do themselves a disservice by being too afraid of losing membership, of having butts leave seats in the congregation to adapt to social norms. I just think we've seen that time and time again. So Pope Francis saying that whatever it was, evolution is not inconsistent with their religion is a small step forward. But I think we're constantly, as big religions, behind the curve on that. And that makes them scared to adapt to normal things. What was the question again? Sorry, I had a second part.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's the God of the Gaps idea that things used to be explained by. Yeah.
Sorry. So what I think is interesting there is, in a more philosophical way, the more we learn, the less we realize we know, and I think that has some scientific repercussions as well. That things used to not be able to be explained. We used to have leeches sucking out our blood to cleanse us, and obviously we didn't know what we were doing, didn't work. And then we discover more scientific processes that help us live better lives and be healthier. But I think at the same time, the more we discover, the more we realize there is more to discover. And I guess I don't really see an end in sight in that sort of step-by-step process. Like, we keep discovering new smallest particles or ways particles interact that we didn't understand before. And those might not, like, as a fine print say, hey, God did this, but they uncover more questions, and then we have more to discover. So I see that process as like scientific and spiritual, because I don't think we're going to ever get to an end of anything.
So while that's possible, we could argue that we're discovering more and more, so we have more questions. I would still argue that we get a better picture of the universe as we make these.
No, I think that's true.
Even though we have more questions, so even in sometimes I think we underestimate the amount of knowledge that we have. Like, the periodic table of elements is a pretty good guide to the composition of the elements in the universe, and at least it seems to be. And even when we talk about small particles, like quarks, unless things have changed, I think a quark is still the smallest, most fundamental part of matter that we understand, and that was discovered back in the 60s. So it's not every single day we're uncovering more stuff. It's oh, we have no idea. It feels like we've put together, at least as far as physics and chemistry is concerned, a pretty good model of how things exist that hasn't been radically changed or shaken, maybe for the past 70, 80 years even.
Well, I mean, if you go down to whole string theory and quantum mechanics, that those were more recent. String theory was late 80s, early 90s. I'm not actually, I'm just talking out my ass.
Yeah, because you're an expert
honestly.
in string theory.
Sure.
I know nothing about string theory, but I do know that both of these kind of breakthroughs rocked the scientific world about the rawest part of creation. So
sure, I would say that quantum mechanics was definitely a big one in terms of changing the way that physicists viewed a fundamental shift in the way that we view things. But even that, everything that we understand. So if we draw a line between classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, right, the way that we understand, everything that we knew in classical mechanics can still be explained using quantum mechanics, right? Except for gravity is the only thing that we haven't figured out yet, right? But everything can still be extrapolated. So it seems like we're still kind of building and refining our knowledge. It's not like we just learned that oh God, all of our science is wrong and now we have a radical shift or whatever. It seems like it's more just been a process of refinement. There are still questions where it's I don't know 100% how this thing works, but we're getting a better and better view of things. I think that's how it feels.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think getting back to this whole God of the Gaps idea, one thing that I really like about the new church faith is that God isn't a God of mystery. The whole idea of divine mystery and God is a way to explain what can't be explained, and we don't understand that, it's a divine mystery. All of that is very much not a part of my faith, and instead it's a revelation of answers and explanation, very much if instead of a God of the gaps, a causal God, if you will, but more showing the connection and the cause-effect chain between the existence of God and all of creation as we know it.
Have you heard of the clockmaker argument? Is that kind of the clockmaker God, basically?
Well, so the difference between it and the clockmaker theory is a very deistic model, right? God created
Sound
and then
like colder
sat back and
deist.
watched.
And let everything go, basically, yeah.
And we're a theistic religion where basically he made a, if you stick with the clockmaker model, he's constantly working within the clock still. He created a realm of reality, and the way that I see it is his interaction with the physical world is not like changing the way that physical things are happening, but his providence, his leading, is changing the way that we are able to respond, helping guide a person to a more patient response or a kinder response, or this the process of spiritual growth within the realm of a static natural world.
So this is what. So I'm a little bit warm to the clockmaker idea, mainly because most of the claims that makes are outside of any testable reality that I would acknowledge. I can't know what happened, prior to the beginning of the universe or anything. I feel like it's a little bit more problematic when we start claiming that God is still tinkering, because I feel like you open yourself up to the huge bag of worms of like, how does God possibly make the decisions on who or who not to help on the planet right now? With the clockmaker idea, it's very easy to answer, like, okay, well, look at the amount of human suffering that exists on the planet. Why would God allow that? And it's like, well, like darkness is the absence of light, human suffering is the absence of God. It's humans doing unto other humans these evils. We have enough food to feed everybody. Children starve in Africa because of the evil of humans, not because of the evil of God. But if we're going to make the claim now that God is interjecting into the lives of some people, right? Why does God help, a middle-aged mom, save her son from becoming disabled because he fell into a lake or whatever, but God doesn't help all of the other millions of people that are going through so much worse, in third world countries? How can you possibly start to figure out why God does what he does or helps who he helps in this reality?
Yeah, we run into this idea of like a capricious God. That's basically what you're talking about, right? Like God picks and chooses at seemingly random with no prerogative who is saved and who is not, who is helped and who is left to their own devices. My faith, as I see it, often talks about the analogy of God as the sun, right? And the sun, like in the New Testament, shines on the evil and the just. It shines on everything, right? The sun doesn't discriminate what gets its light. You on board? And yet we can go outside into the light, or we can stay inside. And so it's not about who does God choose, but it's more about who chooses God, right?
Well, but this kind of doesn't work with all of like the suffering children, right? Like we would argue
that you're talking about.
Yeah, like it's not like they've turned their back from God and they've turned away and they've decided to embrace evils, and now they're starving to death when they're 4 years old, right?
No. I'm not using this as an explanation of like, if you are suffering, it's because you didn't choose God. Because natural suffering is different, I would say. Natural suffering is due to the freedom that humanity innately needs. Like you were talking about, it's humans doing horrible things to other humans is why that happens.
Yeah, but oftentimes when we talk about like miracles, like if we look to Jesus himself, like a lot of the suffering that Jesus alleviated was natural suffering, like leprosy, right? That was one of the things he was the most famous for. I mean, like, well, that's a disease. That's by definition natural. Like, if Jesus can walk around and cure people of leprosy, why wouldn't God cure people today of COVID-19? Or, if Jesus can, create bread and fish to feed people, those people were starving, arguably due to human causes. Why can't God, duplicate food today and feed starving people today? It seems like if you argue that God, again, recentering, if you argue that God takes an active role in shaping the world today, man, the choice is capricious is a nice word to use for the seemingly bizarre and random selection of people that he saves. That's always the same, like, seemingly well-off person in a Christian country that is right relatively affluent.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
and,
I know that's
and
a
that's
hard
where
one.
Can I put words in your mouth, Richard? I feel like you weren't saying tinkering in an individualistic way where God goes in and manipulates someone's individual path, but that God is constantly putting out love into the world and goodness, and it's up to people to receive that or not. It's not like God goes in and changes the path that things are headed on. So I do think it is more that deistic model of setting the clock and letting it go, and not tinkering when things are misaligned. At least that's where I'm coming from.
I push back against it being a purely deistic model. I think we might see it as more deistic than maybe you are identifying other branches of Christianity as like God helps, like prosperity gospel, for example. I don't
Havend or whatever, or Havend or
I don't support prosperity gospel. I don't think that living a Christian lifestyle or a good lifestyle will make you more naturally wealthy. I mean, God says, lay up treasures in heaven.
Osteen, baby.
I don't know.
That was some shots fired at Joel Osteen.
And furthermore, I don't think that living a Christian life will cure you of disease. You know, the disciples come to Jesus and they said, oh, is it this man's sin or his father's that made him blind? And Jesus basically tells them they're idiots. This idea of natural infirmity doesn't come from a personal spiritual source, but rather because evil exists in people, these things come up. These horrible situations arise. Starvation in Africa.
What is the difference between those two? Because I don't understand. Because so initially you say that no one individually is at fault for anything for any affliction they have, but that affliction could still be blamed on the natural evil of people. I guess, like, what is the distinction here?
Well, so what I'm saying is that the natural struggles that you're dealing with are not necessarily causally tied to your choice of evil, right? But rather, like the example, we have enough food to feed everyone, and yet children are starving. Those children didn't choose to starve. They didn't turn away from God or choose to be mean to people, and thus they're starving. But it is evil present in the human experience that is causing that to happen.
I think evil in so much as comparatively to good. There is
selfishness.
Order in so much as there is disorder. Just going back to that general freedom of humans being allowed to, or just being free in general.
Yeah, we're talking about, or I don't know if you use the same term, but my understanding of this is like we're talking about original sin, right? Like the idea that once Adam turned his face from God, that humans kind of innately have this original sin in them that allows them to choose, things away from God, that kind of taints all of humanity now, right?
Yeah, I don't believe in original sin. Like we are born. I think people are born blank slates. Like a baby is not evil, right? A baby is selfish.
Super selfish.
But a baby's not evil for being selfish. But if you or I prioritized only the needs that a baby prioritizes, we would be selfish and not be very good people, right?
Sure.
If all we cared about is whether I ate and I slept and I was clean, and I would be a jerk. And so we start out in a very selfish place, and we're supposed to grow and change from that to a more selfless, a more useful, more widely serving.
And we see that as a work in progress. We don't buy into instantaneous salvation or anything like that. Like you have to work on being a good person, bettering yourself to become that and save yourself in so much as you can.
Sure. If we are taking if we're not going to take like a deistic approach, I guess, to God, then what types of interventions does God make in this world, and how does he choose to make them?
Oh, that's a great question.
I think that people that share the same faith as me interpret this question fairly differently. I think there are people that fall more on the side of like, oh man, I took the back route to my job today and there was a big accident on 95, and if I had been there, I maybe would have been in it. God saved me. That's not where I take it for myself. I think that the tinkering, if you would, that God has is more of an internal thing, more of a spiritual thing. Like when I am able to not say that harsh thing back to someone who pissed me off and not be vengeful, that is me opening myself up to the presence of God to give me the strength to not be an ass, right? And God is present in our process of spiritual growth, not our physical experience.
Okay, yeah. I mean, then like my follow-up question would be like, that's great that God intervened for you in a spiritual manner, in an immaterial manner, and made it so you didn't like shout back at somebody. Why couldn't God intervene, you know, in the crazy husband or wife that murdered their spouse and give them a moment of clarity? Like, how does he choose who to save? It just seems like such an impossible to overcome.
Well, I think God has constant salvation going out, and I don't think God intervenes in a material way to save people or to prevent things from happening. Because again, going back to free will, or we don't that would restrict people's freedom to have that happen. So I guess my faith idea is that it doesn't happen in a material way. It can't, or else we wouldn't be human in the same way and not have any freedom. So it can only happen internally, where God's salvation, if you want to call it, or light or love, is constantly kind of knocking at the door in our mind, and we can choose to open that and accept that good path or that loving choice, whatever that happens to be in whatever moment we're in, on an internal way. And I think that's where that distinction comes in, that it's not material, that it is, if you want to say metaphysical or whatever, of God's light or salvation. And then we have to choose to accept and open that door, kind of.
And I think with your example of like that husband that hits his wife, that's clearly a situation in which he is not reciprocating to God what God is sending out, right? Like,
that's not him opening the God's door.
Yeah, like, for example, if I love my wife and if she doesn't love me anymore, how much of a relationship are we really going to have? None, really, because you need both people to be consenting members of a relationship for any growth to happen. And our relationship with God is the same way, where God is constantly consenting to a relationship with us to help us grow and be happier. But it's our choice. We're left in our own freedom.
Back to that blank slate.
To choose whether we're going to reciprocate and make that relationship a reality or not.
Okay.
You feel?
Yeah, I mean, I totally disagree, but I understand your arguments. I guess my central question is still basically just that like it seems to be I'm never trying to sound condescending when I argue. If I ever come out that way,
don't worry about it.
Yeah, like the central problem that I have is that like initially, if I think of the concept of God, it sounds awesome. I have this eternally loving dude, is omnipotent, knows everything, is omniscient. Or wait, omnipotent is infinite power. Omniscient is knows everything. I think omniscient, he knows everything. He has infinite power. He can guide me, help me, do all these cool things. That sounds awesome. But then when we start to get into the weeds of what can God actually do, we go from this insanely powerful, this guy could beat everybody in the Avengers with his hand tied behind his back. And then he gets weeded back into, God is basically this
can't do anything.
Wi-Fi broadcasting on low frequency. And if you're already like a very loving person, then you kind of get the signal and then you act maybe a little bit more loving than you would have otherwise. So it seems like we end up pushing it back into this realm where it's like, man, you talk about all these people that were receptive to God's message and decided, not to, go off on their significant other or to be a little bit more kind. These people were probably already like pretty kind people to begin with. These people were probably already going to make pretty good choices to begin with. It seems like it'd be really cool for God to step in and maybe, the guy that's about to murder somebody or sell crack to a kid or sexually assault somebody, like these seem like the people that would need God the most, that have the hardest time, putting out their antenna for him. But I mean, obviously as an atheist, it's my point of view, but yeah.
Yeah, I totally get how that is frustrating. And I wish that we lived in a world where God could come in and just quick fix people who are hateful and vicious.
About to harm people.
And about to harm others. But
Well,
again,
I, mean,
I think
we do
that
live in that world, right? He sent Jesus. He did send his son one time.
Well, there's a whole unity of it's fine.
Oh wait, or do you? I'm sorry, I'm not sure for in terms of denomination.
No.
Are you guys like Jesus fans, or do you think Jesus was a?
Yeah,
Jesus big Jesus fans, but we are Trinitarian in that we think that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are different ways of talking about the same person, not a tri-personal Trinity. So the whole "He sent His Son" thing is like, nah, He sent Himself. He came.
So my understanding is Catholics also believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or Holy Ghost, depending on how old you are. Is there a significant difference between how Catholics view it versus how you view it?
Yeah. So they have a tri-personal Trinity where it's three persons that make one God together. Whereas the way I would see it, if you're going to talk about the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. It's more talking about like the love that's in God and the wisdom that's in God and the way that God affects the world. The way that I could talk about myself as a son and myself as a husband and myself maybe one day as a father.
Or as a thinker and as a doer.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's kind of highlighting different parts of a single individual, not talking about three people with conflicting wills that came to a consensus to not have the world be destroyed for its evil.
Sure. I don't think Catholics believe necessarily in the last thing, right? Like the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are all reflective of like a similar entity that even if they are somewhat distinct, they make up a whole, right?
I'm not Catholic,
yes.
so I'm not Catholic.
Yes. And I'm not an expert on Catholic doctrine, but from my understanding with the whole atonement idea where Jesus came to die for our sins kind of thing, where it's like God wanted to destroy humanity and Christ was like, no, please don't. And he was like, fine, because you died, I won't. And obviously it's a huge simplification.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but if that's the thing, I missed that in all of my Catholic education.
I may be mixing up Catholicism and Protestantism. Again, I'm not an expert on other faiths.
Blanket apology.
So take everything I said with a grain of salt.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah. Because I'm pretty sure that God was pretty much on board with like sending his son and everything. That was God that sent him. It wasn't Jesus. Wasn't like his son like fighting like Hercules and Zeus to try to forgive humanity of their sins or whatever. But
I do know that Catholicism has officially a tri-personal trinity, which means three persons, like three distinct people that together make up one God.
But going back a step, Destiny, it seemed like your question was why doesn't God send Jesus again, sort of deal?
Yeah. So that's actually totally relevant. Whether you are whether you believe that they're all three the one person or three different people, why doesn't God just repeat like the New Testament? Why can't we do that every 1,000 years or something?
Just have a reset.
Yeah.
That's reset. A huge question.
Because I mean, like, if I saw Jesus walking around today, like, I mean, I would be a believer. Damn, like, how dumb must you be to be like Judas? Like, you're walking around with the dude, you watch him multiply bread and fish, turn water into wine, perform miracles, have infinite wisdom, outsmart the Pharisees. Like, he's doing so much, and you still backstab him. Like, with somebody like Jesus, like, around today, I mean, I feel like that would be a pretty influential person, right? Like,
see, I feel exactly the opposite. I feel like if Jesus came to Earth again today, people would be like, "Oh man, what smoke and mirrors is he doing to do that? Oh, he's got a lot of cool ideas, but look at him, he's an idiot." And we live in such a skeptical world that I think if Jesus came as a human again, would be like, loser. And I think the Christian world would be like, wow, this fake Christ. I think in general, a lot of Christians are waiting for God's coming again and call everyone who says that they're the Messiah the Antichrist and a fake Christ. And I think that they're right, but I also think that in their worldview, if Christ did come again, they'd have the same reaction of like, this dude's not Christ.
I mean, that's the reaction they had when he came the first time, right? I mean, like,
exactly.
Yeah, like a lot of people didn't believe in him and they killed him then. I mean, so he could still come again and give us a chance again. I don't know. I mean, again, like we have cell phones today. If he were to do some crazy shit like multiplying bread and stuff, or like, I feel like people would take note. But I mean, like regardless of how people respond, I guess it's just God feels very much like God is so, when you read the Bible, God is so alive, right? In every book, in every passage, in every parable, in all the stories from the Old Testament to the New Testament, God feels like very much like a living, breathing thing that is so alive in that world. I don't know if you've watched Game of Thrones, I guess. Maybe it's like dragons and fire and all the old magics. It's like very much alive. But nowadays, it's like, well, man, where is he? Like, if I didn't go to church every Saturday or Sunday and have my pastor tell me how God is alive and present in my life, I wouldn't even notice it. Like, it seems so disconnected from our everyday experience. So much so that people like you guys are here trying to convince people like, hey, this is who God is. This is how he's like relevant in your life right now. This is what he's doing. Like, it feels like we have to fight to like get people to even acknowledge that, as opposed to like in the past where it seems like he had a more active role. It was more knowable or seeable, I guess.
Yeah, I would say throughout all of history, people have had to fight to acknowledge God. I think if you look at the Old Testament and the story of the children of Israel, God was doing huge miracles in front of them constantly. And they're like, what if we worshiped Baal though? And it was like, what? How are you so dumb that God is like a giant pillar of fire for you and speaks openly to you? And then you're like, what about this other God that we haven't seen do anything?
And we made it ourselves.
And And I think that's a reflection of natural human ability to skepticism and ability to discard for their ideas. And so I think I think we've always been that way. And I think two people that, you know, going back to a world where science was magic that different gods were doing, it didn't destroy human freedom to be like, but look, this god's the best god and here's how he shows you. They were like, oh, other gods do magic stuff. We've seen lightning. This god's doing magic stuff. We're on board. He seems to be the best god. It was a way of convincing without limiting their freedom to be like, I'm going to choose a different god that like makes the lightning strike because they seem pretty cool.
Okay.
And I think the same thing can be said in the life of Jesus. There were people who a lot of things they thought were different magic, and they thought that he was amazing, but they didn't think that a lot of people didn't think that he was unique. Where, you know, we see this, like a big example of this in the Bible is Moses, and he comes and he does a plague, and then the Pharaoh's people are like, we can do that magic. And so it's not a unique thing, but he's finding a way to show people that this is the path to happiness while preserving their freedom. And I think in the modern age where we are so intellectual and so reason-based and so scientific method, it needs to be an idea-focused God. Like, oh, hey, see how loving people actually makes the world better and you happier? That's what God's trying to tell you. And that's a message that we can accept without it hindering our freedom. And so a lot of the limitations of God that we see that can be frustrating, like why isn't God stopping all this horrible stuff, is because above everything else, God values humanity's freedom because it's what makes us human. And the moment we don't have freedom, nothing we do matters, because God could have built a bunch of robots that walk around, and he didn't, because this idea of consent and reciprocation is so
super important.
Vitally important.
Okay, so if this ever gets too theological, you can always tell me. Sorry. Okay, so the idea that freedom.
I'm in theological school. So
okay, awesome, cool. Okay, yeah. I have issue with the idea that freedom is what makes us human. If anything, it seems that freedom was one of the most inhuman things that we kind of acquired, right? That when God created us in his perfect image as Adam and Eve, that they had no freedom at that point, arguably, right? And it wasn't until they turned their back to God and ate like the apple that we started to have, you know, this idea of free will, the idea to choose things that were away from God, and that these things were, I mean, if you believe in the Catholic interpretation of things, right, we got original sin from that. Every human is tainted from the moment of birth until you're baptized to cleanse yourself of that original sin. Women are punished with childbirth as a result of the acquisition of said, like, free will. So it seems an interesting take, and maybe your denomination has a different way of addressing this, how you can say that, like, freedom is intrinsic to humans in the idea of what God would have for us when he explicitly created us without freedom, and then we got that through more or less, somehow we messed up and got that. How do you view that? Yeah.
I'm going to jump in, then you correct me, Mr. Theologue.
Cool, go for it.
I think, kind of going back to what Richard was saying, that freedom is sort of relative to the time period that it's in. So, you know, if we're going back to this analogy of Adam and original sin, or even people seeing Moses and seeing Jesus, they had the same amount of freedom to believe in Moses and Jesus and all these other things because of all that unexplained magics that happened. So they had just as much freedom to choose Jesus or choose not to believe in Jesus because of the surrounding area of life. And where we are now is that freedom is a little bit different in that it is more ideas and not physical things that we could or could not explain. Does that make sense, Richard?
Yeah.
That's sort of relative to where people are at in sort of the development of humanity with the things we can and can't explain. And I think we see that as more of an internal, or at least I see it as more of an internal freedom. And yeah, it sucks that, and it's awful and horrible and evil that people are sometimes externally or physically encaged or in human trafficking or aren't free or raised in a terrible, terrible household. But I think it's important that we have freedom of belief and freedom to choose what we want to follow.
Yeah, and I think there are varying degrees of freedom, obviously. Like, I think that I have more freedom to think intellectually than someone who is
Worried about
striving
survival.
to make ends meet, right? I
Yeah.
have more time to study. I have more time to grow the tool that is my brain.
And with that, I think you have, in doing so, you have more potential to do good and more potential to do evil because of that. Like you have a
Yeah.
wider array of things at your fingertips, and so that sort of remains in balance.
Yeah. So I think that freedom is kind of, it's not binary. But I think that at the core essence, there is a most simple freedom of choice that is preserved in all people, for them to be human. Now if you want to get really, now you can stop me if I get too theological. But so going back to this idea of Adam in the garden and all that, again, we see it as allegorical, both allegorical for our own spiritual life and allegorical of the history of humanity. So Adam is talking about us each as individuals, but it's also talking about the first people that existed in the world, the earliest evolutionary chain that had the ability to be spiritual, that had the ability to connect with God. And basically, people created evil, not God, right? That's,
Well, I mean,
I
you're
think
asking
if you,
atheists, so
I mean,
don't know how
if you
that's-
believe in an all-loving God, he didn't, I think is a pretty easy cause effect.
Well, you could say that he allowed evil to exist, but
Well, yeah.
Sure.
But anyway,
evil is the product of human choice, not of sure.
yeah. And so basically the first people still, so they had a connection with God. They were very loving people. They were real great, good people overall. They also still experienced like physical delight in things. They enjoyed eating good food. You know, they enjoyed the feeling that they got when they were nice to other people. And all these things are appropriate. It's good to enjoy the blessings of the natural world. It's good to eat good food. It's good to feel good. You know, getting a massage is nice. God's happy that we're able to enjoy our physical bodies.
Just not too much. Sorry.
Well,
we can get into that.
well, I would say that the too much is when we value it over more important things. Like we,
Spiritual connection with the person, that kind of thing.
If I value a massage more than I value being nice to Luke, something's wrong, right? Something's not right.
Or if you enjoy like having sex with someone more than you actually enjoy them as a person, I think we would say that gets into a little bit of a problem area.
Yeah, I mean, that gets into a lack of consent pretty quickly, and that's a scary place to be. But yeah, so they had enjoyment of these natural things and or self-oriented things, not even primed negatively as selfish, but just self-oriented things. And the formation of evil was over time. They basically they were like, oh man, yeah, it really does feel nice to do my own thing today. And it was a system of, they had the freedom to choose less good things. You know, like I could go out and help everyone in the community, or I could sit on my couch today because I'm kind of tired. I didn't sleep super well. And that's not evil to sit on your couch, but it's not as good as you could be.
Sure, yeah, I understand.
And so over time, that idea of doing the best thing and doing the most selfish thing got a little bit closer and closer until it was finally like they saw it as morally equal. And then that's where evil developed, is I am now putting myself above the people around me and God. And that was the development of evil, was this imbalance of how we treat ourselves and the priority we give our more base experience versus a more spiritual, more community experience, however you want to put that.
Sure.
And so that's how we see the origin of evil, not like oops, Adam and Eve goofed and now we're all tainted kind of mentality. Is that introduced the idea of putting ourselves above God. And it was a slow process in the earliest people.
Sure. Okay.
So that's sort of our origin of evil.
Yeah,
thing.
that's some deep theology right there. You really went
Yeah.
off the rails.
Okay.
Thoughts about
any
that?
Thoughts?
I guess when I talk about like freedom as a concept, we can talk about this concept all day, I guess. Well, are you talking more specifically the part about like the freedom is kind of relative to a time period, or the idea of enjoying somebody more than or like enjoying a process more than a person or something, or disrespecting a person?
Well, I think this you were just talking about sort of the origin of evil and human freedom, and I think that relates to this idea of freedom is relative to the time, and that's why I think that like Christ coming into the world again now would either be ineffective, we'd all be like, who's this guy, or it would destroy our freedom. We'd be like, oh, I guess this is all I can do
And
now.
have no choice to
I am a
believe,
robot now.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of how much time we want to spend talking about freedom. I can kind of understand your point. I guess like my questions would just be like, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily buy into the concept that I think that freedom is relative. I understand we have different choices to make at different points in time, but freedom to me seems to be that just the concept that you can choose something that you otherwise wouldn't have chosen. And that seems to be pretty unique, but something to the human experience. Like there are all points in time, like we've always had the ability to make choices. Like whether or not we're choosing different things in the past, we still have had the freedom to choose, and now we choose and are ubiquitous to human experience is what I was thinking. Yeah.
Well, just in that sort of definition, I definitely think that people can be influenced by their environment and have that be an effect on their quote unquote freedom. And we are all products of our environment in different ways, and that shapes the choices we make.
Yeah, of course.
So I definitely think that we kind of aren't held accountable as much for those things that shaped us in such a way where we automatically felt very strongly toward one end or another. So I'm with you on that about freedom. Yeah.
Sure.
But I think looking at kind of an example, and we go to like old mythologies, people know Greek mythology pretty well, so I'll use that. If you're, in rural Greece and back in the day, and you see lightning strike, you'd be like, oh man, Zeus is pretty pissed today, huh? Right? That's
Sure.
what your worldview would interpret it as.
Sure.
If you saw a giant ball of lightning floating to you that said, I am God, do as I say, you'd be like, whoa, Zeus is talking to me. That's wild. It wouldn't force change upon your worldview. It would definitely force change in your life. It'd be a pretty life-changing experience, and people today still have very life-changing experiences. But it wouldn't force change on your worldview.
Yeah, I don't deny that, of course. Yeah.
If you saw a giant ball of light float toward you that said, I am God, that would probably force a pretty drastic change on your worldview, right?
Sure.
And that's what I mean about this relative freedom thing, is that when you can, the amount that God is able to interact with the world while still leaving people in freedom of choice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, I understand.
Do we feel like we came to a culmination on freedom?
Yeah, I think I understand. So let me rephrase just so I'm on the same page as something. We don't have to talk about the same way if you don't want to. So you're saying that like God's ability to intervene in the world in the form of divine intervention, the impact that it's going to have on our free will is relative to our understanding of the world at the time. So in the past, God might have been able to speak to you from a tree. Everybody thought trees could talk anyway, so that's a normal thing, and it's okay. God can do that, and it doesn't dramatically intervene in your free will. But if he were to do a similar action today, we would know that that's not possible. Our overall base of knowledge is greater. God can't intervene in that manner, so he has to find other ways to do it that don't necessarily impact our free will in such a way that it would cause like a massive turnabout in life immediately, right?
Yeah.
Dude, that's a pretty baller summary. I'm impressed.
Okay, yeah, okay. Gotcha, okay. Okay, cool. All right. I understand your position. All right.
I'd love to hear just where you fall on, because you defined freedom as the ability to make choices we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah.
Where do you fall on the idea of freedom? Do you see freedom as kind of an illusion or a creation of the human consciousness? and everything is actually a cause and effect chain. Like the reason I'm here is because I was somewhere yesterday that caused me to be, et cetera, et cetera? Or do you see freedom as an actual faculty of humanity?
I'm a hard determinist, so yeah, I believe that we were always going to talk to each other at the birth of the universe, basically. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I figured that's where you would be from watching some of your talk about your belief system. So I was surprised to hear you define freedom as making a choice we wouldn't otherwise make, which seems pretty against determinism.
Yeah, there's like a form of, I don't know, this concept is called contextualism, but when we talk about things, I use words relative to the layer of conversation that we're having. So I like to talk about fiction to illustrate this. When I say something, when somebody asks me a question like, did Snape, spoiler alert for anybody listening who hasn't read the Harry Potter books, if somebody asks me like, did Snape kill Dumbledore? There are a multitude of ways that I can answer this question in a really stupid manner. The first way is, Snape isn't real, so Snape couldn't have killed anybody, and Dumbledore isn't real, so no one could have killed him. I could say that. I could say, well, Snape and Dumbledore didn't do anything. It's fiction, so nothing action. Are you asking me if J.K. Rowling wrote that Snape and Dumbledore, right? Like there's a lot of ways that you could but we understand when we say, did Snape kill Dumbledore? We're saying, well, within the fiction of the Harry Potter universe, did J.K. Rowling write that these two characters did this particular thing? There's a whole branch of linguistics, I think, or linguistic philosophy that has to do with all the underlying assumptions that we make when we speak to each other, right? Can I go to the bathroom? When you say, can I go to the bathroom, that statement is almost nonsense. What you're really saying is like, I need to go to the restroom in order to relieve myself, and I'm requesting permission from you to do so that I can do this without getting into any kind of trouble, and I need to do this immediately. There's like a whole, like, you can write like paragraphs of like underlying assumptions for very simple statements. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. So that's why I wanted to
so when you ask me,
clarify.
Yeah, when you ask me, when I talk about choices, like I still talk that way. I have to, right? Like if I'm scolding somebody, like, why would you choose to do something that's stupid? Like, what's wrong with you, right? I would never say like, oh, well, he did that because of determinism, right? I have to speak within the framework as we're humans and we still talk about choices, and that's how we think that we, do these things. So of course I'm going to speak as though we're making decisions and not just say like, oh, that's deterministic. Oh, that's deterministic. Oh, that's deterministic. That doesn't really have any meaning to us, right? Yeah.
So would you say that your determinism is sort of like something you see as intellectually true but doesn't affect the process of your daily life? Because I think that if we connect determinism in reality to our actions, we relieve ourselves and everyone of any fault, and basically nihilism is the result. Do you get what I'm saying? And again, I'm not trying to dismiss your worldview. I'm trying to say that I think there's a difference between being like, I think intellectually this is how it works, but it doesn't serve me to live my life by that.
So,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So determinism can serve us determinism can serve us in an intellectual sense, and that it can help us better to understand why people make the decisions that they make, and it can help us predict things that are better. So I don't know if you had a religious upbringing. One thing my mom used to tell me all the time is garbage in, garbage out, and you are who you hang around. So like pick better friends, because if you pick bad friends, you're going to grow up to be a bad person. If you spend all your time consuming junk content, watching horrible stuff on TV, blah, 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 because we watched TV back then, they would say, oh, well, you're going to grow up to be a garbage person, right? Or not a garbage person, but like, garbage in, garbage out. It's not good. So like this, regardless of my mom standing on free will, this is a somewhat of a deterministic understanding of the world, right? That if I have enough of a negative influence, I'm going to have somewhat of a negative outflow. That's just an inevitability of that process. Now, the physical understanding that we have in the world and a moral understanding we have in the world are two different things. So from a deterministic point of view, I can say that like this person had X% probability, single parent household, grew up in a ghetto, no school, no job, drafted into gangs, did drugs, did all this, blah, 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 and then he murdered somebody. On a moral level, I can still hold you accountable for that action morally, while still recognizing on a physical level that, sure, fine, we live in a deterministic universe, but I still need to be able to ascribe moral agency agency to you so that I can make judgments on your actions, because we have to, because morality seems to be a pretty important thing for determining how humans interact with each other. I think in philosophy, an idea kind of like this would be the concept of compatibilism, that we would speak in different levels of free will. So for instance, if somebody holds a gun to my head and forces me to do something, I'm not making that choice as much as if I were to just walk into a store and start shooting. Even though from a deterministic aspect, both of them are inevitable, but from a, well, what choice are you making, we would recognize there's a difference between these two things. In one, we would hold a moral agent accountable, and the other, we would say, okay, it's not your fault. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense
Cool.
to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question about determinism and I forget it now. Oh, one of the uses of determinism that I see, just like tracing this cause and effect chain, I think can grow empathy in a person, where you can see like, oh, well, there's a reason why they're behaving like they did.
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason
seeking
why
to
they're kicking
understand.
back from trauma that happened. There's a cause effect chain here that makes them respond differently to the way that I think is rational to respond.
Yeah.
And I think that it falls apart when, like you were saying, we use that to not ascribe any moral weight to anything, because we need to ascribe moral weight to things in order for society to function.
Well,
Well,
I think that lends itself. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, what do you mean when you say we can't ascribe moral weight? Can you expand on that? Are you saying
Well,
that,
like
for instance, like we can't say that this person did a bad thing, so it clouds our judgment? Or are you saying we can't write a person off completely by saying they're evil, so that's why they did something? Where are we going there?
No, like from the realm of determinism, you say because this person inevitably would have reached this conclusion, we can ascribe no moral positive or negative to what they were doing because it was inevitable from the dawn of the universe. So
Sure.
there's no morality to their action or any action.
So
because
I like
it was inevitable.
I feel like you can use that view to inform yourself, though, to prevent the overall amount of evil that exists in the world. So, for instance, I don't believe that there are any truly evil or any truly righteous people. People are a product of their environments, of their upbringing, etc. With the way that I analyze that, so if we look at something like we'll say Hitler or Nazi Germany or something, right? I don't think that any of the Nazis or Hitler himself were evil people. I think that if you put people in predictable environments, you'll get predictable outcomes. So taking that understanding, what I can do is I can look to the future and I can go, okay, well, I see this sort of environment is starting to brew, and I know that this type of environment creates these types of people. Maybe we should prevent this type of environment from beginning, because we know what it culminates in.
Does that take away anything from human creativity and freedom? Like, are you saying that the same person going through Hitler's upbringing or environment would be the same exact person and do the same things every time?
Yep, assuming
Because
they have the same like genetic code and everything. Yeah.
Interesting, because I think there's more to human creativity and decision making than just kind of A plus B equals C. Like, there are so many factors going into it that the decision I make, I don't think would be the same decision I would make every time. Like, I think that there are a myriad of choices I can make at all times, and that doing it over again might not yield the same exact result.
So the question that I would have there then is like, let's take some given decision that you make regarding some outcome. If I were to wind the clock back 5 minutes, I would say everything would repeat itself verbatim, exactly the same. But you think that you might make a different choice. Why would you make a different choice one time that you wouldn't have prior to that?
I guess that's true. If every single external factor is exactly the same, there probably wouldn't be any justification for things to go different.
Yeah.
But I guess my larger point was that I think it's hard not to say that there isn't any moral weight to someone or something, because even though their environment was set up in such a way, they still did choose things. And I think evil people choose things for selfish or evil gains. If someone held a gun up to your head and said, you need to do this, and that action was deemed immoral, that wouldn't be a consequence from you or a moral weight on you because you were forced into that. But I think there is flexibility with what is forced and what is just influenced by your environment.
Yeah, but so it feels like the flexibility becomes a little bit like meteorology, where earlier I think you said, one of you said that you didn't believe in anything as truly random. When we were talking about evolution, you said it's like mutations or chance aren't truly random, right? In weather, nothing is truly random. Every single raindrop is going to fall in the same spot it would have always fallen or have always fallen. But it appears to be somewhat random because we don't have the ability to measure every single input. So we can't know where every drop of what. We can barely tell the weather from one day to the next sometimes, right? So I would argue, I would posit that the same argument can be made when it comes to like determinism. Like we would say that like, well, okay, sure, maybe when it comes to choosing if I would pick like the left M&M or the right M&M, maybe I would have always made the same decision. But for more complicated choices, there's so much more that goes into it. But I think that we kind of hide behind that idea that there's so much more when the reality is that, well, if every single antecedent cause was the exact same, if every single auxiliary reason remained unchanged, there's no reason to assume that you would just do one thing differently than you would the other. Or if you would, you'd have to be able to point like, well, where does that spontaneous innovation, that random chance thought in your mind, where could that possibly spawn from? If everything else remains the same.
I think, I agree with you. And I think this comes back to the idea that you mentioned a while ago about assuming there's an omniscient God who knows how you're going to act. It doesn't take away from your choice in doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Like just because there is a determined outcome doesn't mean that you didn't choose the steps to that outcome. Right.
Sure. But the problem is if you agree with what I just said, I can run that recursively back to the dawn of time. So like if you believe that you would have always made some decision about going to school, maybe you would have always made the same decision about how to get to school. If we back up, maybe you would have chosen certain friends as a result of things you learned from your parents, as a result of the TV shows they would have shown you, as a result of the guidance you got from, family members growing up, that we can run this back all the way to the minute of your birth where you are constantly being bombarded with influence from everything around you that, so here's the thing, okay? If you see a child and we've all seen this because we're all American, or I assume you guys are. Are you guys American?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Not to point anybody out, but if you see a child that's like 6 or 7 years old, that's like massively overweight and obese, do you really blame the child for that? Like, can you? Like a 6, 7, 8-year-old child? Like, you can't. But like once they're already on that path, I think I read a figure once that it was like, I think it was 0.7% of people in their entire lives that are obese will ever make it back to the normal BMI. 0.7%. It was less than 1%.
Wow.
It's astoundingly low. Yeah. That ever go from being obese back to overweight and then to normal, that it's that low. If you're already at that level when you're 6 or 7 or 8 years old, like, how are you to judge that person when they're 18 and still obese? Like, yeah, they are making the choice to eat every day, but are they really making the same choice that like somebody like I am? Because I was never obese growing up, Yeah. So like for me to get
a really understanding viewpoint.
Yeah. So like for me, and this is kind of why I like to have, even if determinism seems to rob us of our ability to make stronger moral convictions, I like that it feels a little bit more prescriptive in that, well, if I understand how a person got there, we can help them get back, or we could prevent future people from getting there. Which is why I like to look at people being like an outcome of their environments, because we can change environments. It's easy for me to be like, hey, when kids do after school programs, they're less likely to have premarital sex and, get STDs and have abortions. I can just do that. That's better to say that than to just go to a bunch of kids and say, hey guys, stop being evil. Stop having sex. God doesn't like it. Right. That doesn't really do anything.
I totally agree. Yeah. And I think that to change the world, we need to appeal to the actual effective change, like environment and things like that. Because if we just say like, hey, you should be good, people are like, why?
Yeah.
Or say, okay, hey, be good because it makes society better and actually is going to make everyone happier.
And you happier.
And you happier. And so if you want to be happy, which we all do, being nice to the people around you is the way to do that. In a broad statement. That is how we affect change, right? When we and what I come back to with this whole idea of determinism is one of the things that always kind of sticks with me is you say like determinism helps us see the situation that caused a thing in order to change it.
Yeah.
But weren't you always going to change it? So why do you need to be a determinist? But you always would have been it just feels tautological.
Well,
in some ways.
Determinism exists on a foundation that like is not worth thinking about as humans, because it's like it.
Yeah, I get that.
It's kind of like time doesn't really exist. Like, there's not, like, when we talk about like past and future, these are human concepts. There's not like a universal hard drive that stores the past somewhere that I can go and access, you know? Even if we have like an understanding of like time, we speak with it, even if it doesn't really truly exist as a thing. And then, yeah, you know, it's the same thing with like determinism and choice. Like when I say like, hey, you should make better choices. Remember how I, remember how earlier I said that when I ask, may I go to the bathroom? It's actually way much more. Yeah. When I'm telling someone, I think you should make better choices, like that whole statement is really like, hey, I'm somebody that has influence in your life. I'm going to make this statement in the hope that it's going to cause you to change your mind on something. So I'm going to tell you to do this thing that I think would have a better outcome for you. And I'm going to try to make that argument to you, understanding that because I believe in a deterministic system, me being one of your inputs here is going to cause you to make a different decision, right? It's more like it still works in a deterministic mind frame. We just wouldn't like verbalize on every single type of interaction, right? Because it would be nonsensical to do so, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I don't disagree with that in theory, but I would say the very last step, like I clearly believe in a cause effect chain. I think it's wild to believe otherwise, but I think there is a tiny moment before a choice is made that is a truly free moment. And maybe you would always choose the same thing, but I don't think that makes it not freedom. And again, going back to this, like, just because God knows it's going to happen doesn't mean you didn't choose it kind of ideology. And I think that is kind of where my faith connects with your worldview is, and behind all this cause and effect is the creative force of God. Right. And in that little tiny moment before a choice is made, that's where God affects a person.
Sure.
Right. And I think those effects are unseen because they need to be unseen. And I think to a non-religious person, that really feels like a cop out.
Yeah.
And for a lot of years, for me, that felt like a cop out. And it came back to the idea of if you need me to prove it to you, then we're not talking about faith anymore. We're talking about science.
Yeah.
And by nature, if I say this is my faith, it is not proven, and that's a nonsense question.
Sure. Yeah. So right? I mean, like, obviously, I completely disagree with you, but I understand with what you're saying, right? So like my statement would be like every single choice that you make, there's only two possible things that could influence your choices. One is the knowledge in your head. So everything that's happened to you prior. And then two would be your biology. So like, how are your hormones being produced? How is your brain working? Like, these are the only two things, right? If we were to try to slip in some immaterial faculty for making a decision, another part that would influence us would be, this is where we would like bring in the soul, right? We would have this immaterial entity that's a reflection of some immaterial aspect of our lives, our soul, and maybe this is the thing that would be the final push. You know, like I could either do some horrible thing or do some incredibly righteous thing. I have my brain and my biology. I've got all my prior determinants, and what am I going to choose? And maybe the moment before we make that choice, maybe some reflection of your inner character, this immaterial thing comes forth to push you in one direction or the other. That would be like the place where we could slide in some non-deterministic input, I would say, right? To have some kind of free will.
Yeah. I see the cause and effect chain a little differently. So for a little bit of background, my faith believes that there's a natural world, the physical world, we're all in it, right? And then up from that, there's a spiritual world, and things flow from God through the spiritual world to the natural world. And that's the cause effect chain that's happening. Right. And sometimes it flows through the spiritual world from hell onto earth. And that is a negative influence, the influence of evil in the world. And it also is flowing through heaven into people. And so when you say like what hormones are happening in your brain, the stepping back, the cause of those hormones happening in your brain, I don't see as a moment previous in physical time, but rather a spiritual effect bleeding into the physical reality or physical substance. And do you see how that cause effect chain is not horizontal, but vertical?
Well, it's still horizontal as far as time goes, right? Like it's a cause and effect and a cause and effect. We're just arguing about how, or you're giving me a different area where earlier on like causes were happening that caused effects that caused other causes that cause other
or you're
effects?
saying what is the source of action, kind of?
Well, so I'm saying like people say like, oh, you only feel happy because endorphins are released in your brain. And I actually switch that causal link. That endorphins are released in your brain because spiritually you are feeling happy, and thus your body responds to match, so that the happiness is actually felt in the body, in our physical consciousness.
Spirit first,
Sure.
sort of.
And this is something that I would say like is like a fun story, but like if I have no way to empirically demonstrate that, it seems like one of the big problems. So as a materialist, right, or as a physicalist, like I believe that like everything that happens is more or less reducible to some cause in the physical world. One of the reasons why I like this point of view is because then everything can be tested and then predicted. That one thing that I have trouble with, and this applies to theology and a multitude of other types of beliefs, is it's possible to make a lot of claims that are foundationally rooted in worlds that I can't observe or test. So what you just described could be a case, but I could make like a million other stories that also describe emotion. But if at the end of the day, if we can't test one thing or another, it's kind of like you said at the beginning, like it's all a product of faith at the end of the day, that the story could literally be anything. So why should anybody buy into one thing over any other, I guess?
Well, I think what it comes back to, like my own personal story of one person, I found that the faith life that I had been living since my upbringing served me better as a path to my happiness and usefulness in the world. And I think that's really what it comes down to. If you find that determinism is a path to be more useful in the world and be more happy and content in yourself, and a theistic approach is not that, I'm not trying to sell you on a theistic approach then, because I don't want you to be less happy and less useful.
Sure, but like, would that argument logically follow? Like, if something serves you well, if an idea of something serves you well in the physical world, does that mean that idea is necessarily true or real?
No, but I don't know if I see. I'm going to say something and then think about whether.
Sure.
I don't know whether I see a connection between like factual accuracy and moral value, as much as I see a connection between its effect and usefulness and moral value, right? Like,
sure.
If I believe that there's a giant purple monster above that's telling me to be a good person, and I be a good person for that reason and learn to love it and am not living in fear of this giant purple monster anymore, how much do I care that there isn't one?
Well, so
that's sort of where I come to in my moments of doubt about God.
Yeah.
Like, the life that I'm living is one that I think is useful for the world around me and makes me happy. And maybe I die and I'm dust, but then I'm dust. Why do I care?
Sure. So these are claims.
Immature, but like.
Yeah, no, that's a fine. Yeah. So my big problem with religious claims is I think that there are some things that don't exist that are useful concepts for us to have as humans. So for instance, I don't believe in any form. I don't think that when I talk about something existing, what I mean is this like a feature of the world that if all humankind were to disappear would still be there, right? For instance, like society is not something that would exist like that. Even that concept is a human concept, that if all humans disappear, then the concept of society kind of disappears. That's like a human-held concept. I would view morality to be this way. I don't think that morality is something that exists. I think that's kind of like a human-constructed thing. When we invent, so I'm using the word invent, when we invent stories like religion that we can use to source our claims for things like morality that seem to me to be largely immaterial. They don't have like some foundational thing in the world.
I think natural law, sort of.
I don't know if I'd say natural law. Just the idea that you can source your foundational moral claims from another realm that I can't see or trace and exist to. Like the big problem that I have with that, in one end, I'm okay with that as long as this doesn't bleed over into any type of physical claims you make. So, for instance, if you want to say like, I think I should be a good human because foundationally, I think we should treat all other humans as respect, and I believe that because of the purple monster or something. Then, okay, fine. That's fine. If that gets you treating humans good or whatever, okay, I'm on board with that. But as soon as you start saying things like, like, I don't give my children, vaccines or food or something because the purple monster says that stuff is bad, it's like, okay, well, now we have a really big problem. Like, now you're taking the thing that you used to source immaterial claims for, and now you're starting to contradict, like, empirical, physical things that we have an understanding of. That's a big problem that I have with that, firstly. And then the second big problem I have, this is a two-pronged thing. So one is when people start to make empirical claims based on weird immaterial things is my first problem. The second problem is, what do I do when two people are sourcing their moral claims from other dimensions that I have no access to, and they have incredibly contradictory answers? So one person says we ought to take care of our children and treat them well so they grow up and become functional adults, and the other person says, well, my God says that, we should abuse all children, and, because it's funny for us. And if both of them are sourcing their claims from these immaterial worlds and neither can prove either world, how can I tell one person they're right and one person they're wrong? So those are my two big problems with sourcing things from an immaterial world, I guess. Or spiritual.
Well, I think that, honestly, I would say that everyone, to some degree, sources their belief system from an immaterial world because your perception is never objective. Right? The way that you perceive the world is colored by your upbringing, by your experience, by the messages that you attach to things. Would you agree with that?
Kind of.
Like, for me, when I see someone hit their kid, my reaction is, that's bad. That is not good.
So
there are people who, when they see a person hit their kid, think, that kid needed to be disciplined.
So I would argue that there are types of things that we can perceive that ought to be shared experiences that seem to be reducible to some fact of the matter, some fact in the world. So, for instance, it seems to be the case that so here are two things that I assume to be true. The first thing is that all of us seem to be granted with some a priori understandings of the world. So, for instance, very basic things like A equals A, the law of identity, or very basic things like non-contradiction. Something can't both be and not be. Or very simple things like causality, cause and effect. These seem to be like intrinsic to the human mind. That's one thing. And then the second thing is, it seems that we have a shared set of sensory systems that operate in ways that we can understand one another. We seem to have shared experiences. So all of us can see like a card and understand that it's a card. All of us can see a thing and understand it's a thing. These are the knowledge that's generated from these two things. So from our sense data that we gather, and then that goes through these kinds of like a priori logics that we have in our head. All of these claims, I would say, are fundamentally different from like moral claims. So for instance, just because somebody says, oh, two people can agree that, like this is a piano, two people can agree on that. Therefore, if two people can agree on morality, that's the same thing. It seems like the morality is something different because nobody's perceiving that. And it's not coming from anywhere like in the world, whereas stuff that we can see and interact with, it seems to be like a fundamentally different type of claim. Sorry, that was a lot. Did that make sense?
No, yeah, that makes sense to me. But are you saying that your worldview and your judgment of morality or the process to a happier, less pain-filled world, whether you want to say it's morality or not, are you saying that is based purely on objective data and not your life experience coloring the way that you see the objective sense data?
Okay, I'm sorry. So specifically, what are you asking me? Are you asking me if my view of what a perfect world would be is objective or subjective?
Well, your view of a morally better world.
Yeah, I mean, that's
right?
I would say that's clearly subjective for sure. It must be.
And so I'm saying everyone's worldview innately, whether you draw it from originally immaterial sources, right? If you look at science and see the rates at which children who receive vaccines survive, and so you decide to do that or not, that seems rather objective. And yet there are people that find data to say the other. And I think that they would defend that theirs is as objective and as true as yours is. Now, maybe they're just blatantly wrong.
Yeah, this would be
In
like...
this case, I would say they're blatantly wrong.
Yeah, I would say that this is... We would have to find like a different topic. Just for the vaccine thing in particular, like the medical community and all the data is like pretty overwhelmingly in one direction.
Yeah, it is a bad example.
Yeah, maybe
trying to be anti-vax on here.
Sure. I guess all I'm fundamentally saying is that like moral claims are a lot different than like the claims of like certain physical objects existing. Whether or not this piano exists is like... I would, just because that passes through my human perception, I wouldn't say that this is subjective in the same way that a moral claim is subjective. I would argue that these are two fundamentally different types of claims.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah,
Okay.
just like a sword is not a moral thing, but the way a person wields it is or can be a moral.
Could potentially be, yeah, for sure, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm down with that.
I'm trying to link this back to our original discussion. What?
So the two problems, two fundamental problems I have is that one is when people use their spiritual claims to start denying empirical evidence, and then I think what we were getting at more was the second one was what happens when people start sourcing their moral claims from an immaterial world, but those moral claims are things that I dramatically disagree with, that I find atrocious. So you think you should abuse children, for instance, because of your whatever God tells you that.
Oh, right. So I think your origin of finding it atrocious, I think, is also a subjective thing.
For sure,
it's
it
not
is,
a material
absolutely.
thing.
Well, subjective and material can be the same, right? So it's subjective such that like my personal experience is going to influence what I find to be, feels good or feels bad. But that's different than it being like an immaterial, something that doesn't exist in this reality. So every subjective claim I have
fair.
has some material foundation. Yeah.
So I think that you saying two people sourcing their morality from an immaterial place, they're still both coming to a situation with subjective morality, just like you are sourcing it from a material place. And so I don't know if I see a distinct difference in validity there.
So
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. So like the source for my moral claims is I basically make an appeal to a person's self-interest that like these are things that we could do that would make everybody happier. So you should be roped into this just by virtue of like your own set of preferences. And that's the extent of the argument that I'll make. If somebody else
is that self-interest or interest of society?
Self-interest, but I think that I think the interest of society plays into your self-interest quite significantly. So for instance, let's say that you live on a block with 9 other people. If all 10 of you, if we do this kind of like game theory, if everybody starts stealing from each other, everybody will kill each other, and it's horrible. Nobody wants to live in a neighborhood where everybody's constantly breaking into each other's houses. But if all of you come to a mutual agreement, like, hey, listen, not only will I not break into your house, if I see anybody messing with your stuff, I'm going to call the neighbors or call the police or something. If we all kind of look out for ourselves, everybody secures like a better world for themselves by being interested in the world of their neighbor. Basically, is the argument that I try to make for morality.
Is that like a greatest good sort of scenario? Because what if there are 10 kids, 9 kids all agreed that the 10th kid sucked and he doesn't deserve to have any of his stuff, so those 9 kids kill the kid and divide up the stuff? Is that okay?
So you have to play a bit of a logic game here, but basically the appeals that you would have to make is that if you're targeting some individual, you need a really good reason to do so, because if you don't have a really good reason to do so, there's nothing that prevents you from being targeted by this in the future. So for instance, let's say that you have a block of 10 people. Let's say that one person is black and you're like, okay, let's all take the black dude stuff. And now you're down to 9 people and everybody's okay. Well, who's to say tomorrow that somebody's like, okay, you're the only one that has, moles on your face, or you're the only redhead, or you're the only person with brown eyes, and now it's you, right? So it seems that like whatever kind of protections you would demand for yourself, I would never want to be hunted for the color of my skin. I kind of have to make those same demands for my neighbors, because I would hope that they would be interested in making the demands for myself. It's a sort of
so it's a more intelligent self-interest kind of.
Yeah, or like a sort of Rawlsian theory of justice, veil of ignorance kind of thing, that like you kind of have to maximize society for every individual so that every individual is maximizing society for every other individual, kind of like that basically is the argument that I mean,
from a spiritual perspective, it's sort of basically exactly the golden rule. Right, do unto others as you would have them do you, right? If you don't want that to happen to you, don't do it to other people, because if you do it to other people, you create a world in which that happens, and now you might be the one that happens to. Yeah,
for sure. But I can source all of that without having to appeal to, like, I don't think I need any immaterial appeals to do that. But when I start to argue with somebody that has an immaterial appeal, well, now I'm kind of lost, because, like, how am I supposed to tell you that your particular God or immaterial plane is wrong when I don't even believe we can know about immaterial things?
Well, I do think that all of my immaterial beliefs take substance in the material world, and they can be seen having a positive or negative effect on the material world.
That's kind of the only way they can play out or be seen or be felt.
Well,
yeah, so it's not just like, I know that this isn't happening and isn't matching material events, but I'm still going to believe it. That would be a cause for me to say, maybe I'm not understanding what God is saying right, because clearly this isn't matching what's happening in the world.
Kind of, yeah. But earlier when we were discussing issues related to consciousness, you spoke for a brief moment. There might be something that intervenes that allows you to make a free choice. And I remember as a response to me there, you said something along the lines of like, if you were to ask me to prove that this thing exists, well, obviously we're not having a conversation about faith anymore, so I can't prove that thing, right? So at some level of buying into an immaterial concept, there has to be some amount of faith that can't be empirically deduced in order for it to be, like theological, right?
But I don't think that means that it disagrees with the empirical data. And I think that's an important distinction, right? And you said yourself, if it doesn't disagree with the empirical data, then if it helps you be better to the world and create a better life for people, then sure. And I see when it starts to disagree with empirical data,
like the mom who lets her kid play in the street because God's going to protect them.
Yeah, when it starts to do things like that, that's when I think that's a time to reflect on your faith and whether you're properly understanding it.
Sure.
And we can layer on to all of this the idea of like, how easy is it to find objective empirical data anymore? How many studies are being done with an agenda to find a certain result? If I was to go online and look up stats about the deaths caused by vaccines, I could find it. Whether it's true or not, I could find it.
I guess what I'm saying is that like
so,
these types of claims, like whether or not, so like these are easy, okay? Even I don't know if you're familiar with Sam Harris. Even Sam Harris like will make like, oh well, like this thing is obviously wrong, like children playing in the street, that shouldn't happen, blah 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 blah. These are, I would consider these to be easy moral questions though. If we were to say that moral questions are answerable. So the harder ones come when people draw immaterial foundations for morality. The harder questions are things like, let's say, gay marriage. Because now you don't have any material harms being committed, or at least any obvious ones, but you have great immaterial crimes being committed, right? A man and a man were just never designed, in the eyes of God, to be together in that sort of union. It's just not right. So we have an immaterial source for our claims, which is God, and now we have immaterial damage happening to the souls of these people or to the spiritual fabric of society. How can we push back on these claims? Assuming that two gay people together doesn't, demonstrably harm society or something. If somebody wants to say that this is wrong just because, spiritually I believe so, how do you ever combat that person's claim?
I think that sort of gives a fragile view to the spiritual well-being of society, that it's so easily broken by something that might not be perfectly aligned in their specific theological worldview or whatever. I don't see like the marriage between a man and a man as being directly harmful, unless people are letting it, in which I think that might be on them. But like, what spiritual harm is that doing to society? I don't see much in that. And so as far as morality is minimizing harm.
Well, I think that with people that see that as morally wrong, I think that they would see there is a demonstrable damage, and maybe it just has not. Well, maybe a demonstrable natural damage that has not yet come about. Like when people smoked cigarettes at the beginning, they were like, yeah, they're healthy for you. There's nothing wrong with that. I've been smoking for 10 years. There's no problem with it. And in that time, there was no demonstrable damage, right? But eventually we found out actually there is a studyable damage to it. And I think people with any spiritual foundation that is of a natural event would claim an eventual demonstrable damage.
Sure, but I think that there are types of harms that we can agree that even if no material damage emerged, people would still say there's an immaterial harm or sin being committed. That like, even if society, or you really think that like, let's say that we had a perfect tool to measure all of society. Let's say that we found out two things. Let's say we found out premarital sex, just nothing bad came of it. And let's say that we found out that like gay relationships, that nothing demonstrably bad in a material sense emerged. Do you think that most religious people would be on board with saying like, and I know you don't speak for most religious people, but I feel like most people would still say, well, there is still a harm, a spiritual harm being committed here, regardless of any material harm emerging or not.
I think so initially, and I think it gets back to something we talked about way in the beginning, which is I think religious bodies are very slow to change because of fear of things. So yeah, empirical data might come out about something, and it might take an organization longer to adhere to that because they're afraid of traditions lost and losing the relationship they have with congregants. So yeah, I definitely think there would be pushback on that, but I don't think in this hypothetical view that they would be right for staying entrenched in their tradition.
I think with social complicated topics like that, it would be hard to find empirical data against, right? Like the lack of something doesn't prove its non-existence, right? The lack of evidence doesn't prove the non-existence of something, right? So I think a person that disagreed with these from a moral foundation would say it hasn't yet had a negative effect. That effect is coming and it will be measurable in the future. But I think taking your hypothetical, I think in a reality where these more immaterial beliefs were statistically proven somehow to not have any negative material effect, my reaction would be, oh, well, whoa, maybe I need to re-examine the way that I'm seeing this. Maybe I need to re-examine my belief because it's not matching the way the world is behaving right now.
And I think religions are at their worst when they're antithetical to society.
Well, I think that depends. I think that religions are at their best when they're antithetical. That word, wow, can't even say it. To negativity in society, right? Like for a long.
I guess I'm pushing back on like the recent Christian pushback against people being socially isolated by the government. You know, I think that is religion at its worst in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but I also think, like, for example, and this isn't directly tied to religion, but there are connections here. The business world has seen a really drastic change in the past like 20 years in ethical business practice. Sure. There was a time in the world where being a business person basically meant like, oh, to survive in this industry, like you need to be cutthroat and blah, blah, blah. And there are people that still believe that. But the practice of business and the business philosophy these days is that actually consistent ethical business practices provide a more fruitful personal business life and a more fruitful community and organization. And so we've seen a change in this way. And I think that's the kind of thing where religion or any sort of higher moral code pushing back against socially accepted norms, that's where it thrives.
It can, yeah, sure.
And so I think just saying when religion pushes back against society, that's when it's at its worst, I think is too narrow.
Yeah, I'm saying that in the realm of empirical data says is or isn't okay. Like,
yeah, okay, yeah. When religion stubbornly discards
that's what I'm saying.
Evidence.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with that. But yeah, so I think this idea of what religion's use is a tough one for me, especially as I am looking forward to imminently being a leader in religion.
Do you think there is use in religion?
So my major understanding, well, in terms of use, so there can be use in anything. There's use in Santa Claus in terms of getting children to act better around Christmas time, right? Sure. Whether or not there's use in something is a fundamentally different claim than whether or not something exists independent of human perception, right? Or human consumption.
I'm kind of switching gears.
But I mean, yeah, obviously there can be a great use for religion. I mean, of course, you bring communities together, get people to volunteer and do things, get to see everybody get out of the house every Sunday, build stronger families, can provide some moral foundation or guidance to your life, a rough set of rules you don't have to think about and you can just accept blindly and do pretty good on. There's a ton of utility for religion, of course.
Cool.
I would disagree with your last sentiment of accept blindly. I think a lot of religious people don't take a set of rules and accept them blindly.
Oh no, I'm not saying you. I'm saying that if you did, you do okay. Like if you just blindly accepted most of the rules of like any major, at least Christian religion, you're probably going to be okay. Like you're not going to be like a horrible person. I don't think most people.
It's an innate use of religion.
What?
I think that is I don't think that's an innate use of religion. I think that is a way that people have used religion that does fine, but I think it is a more healthy religious belief to have well-examined belief leading your life, right?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
Just throw out that
To
clarification.
clarify, yeah.
I'm also one of the big problems that I've had with religion in the past is something that you guys seem to reject is the reluctance to change. I mean, if you're more willing to evolve your beliefs as time goes on, I would be a lot more friendly towards that religion than one that insists on using the same moral norms of 100 or 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, an interesting thing that just the organization that I'm a part of supports, and I think that the faith of my religion supports, is not having formalized doctrine specifically to avoid that problem.
Mhm.
Not being like, here are the tenets of our faith apart from what our actual scripture says.
Mhm.
Because we see this like, here is the tenet of our faith as a very limiting thing for humans' ability to perceive a better world. And if we're tied to a council that happened between 1,000 and 3,000 years ago, now we're like, ooh, seems like that would be better, but people decided it wasn't before, so I guess we're going to stick with them.
Yeah.
And
I just think it's a very selfish model that religions can fall into, where they're not meeting people where they are, but instead forcing people to meet the religion where they are.
Mhm.
And I think that's when religions can become a little unhealthy and, entrenched in these thousands of year old creeds that don't apply in the same ways. And so I think the best religions are flexible to the times, and everyone has their ups and downs with that.
yeah, I think there's an interesting balance between flexibility to positive social change and the ability to stand firm against what they see as negative social change.
That's a hard balance.
And what you see as negative social change, obviously, is a tough conversation for anyone to have.
Mhm.
But I think that a religion that just says, "Oh, does culture say that?" then we're on board, is a religion that quickly becomes obsolete.
Sure.
Right? If all the tenets of religion are like whatever society says, then people are like, "Oh, then what? Why are you here? You mean nothing."
Yeah. Yeah.
And then religion dies. So it's an interesting balance.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other major? We're at about 2 hours. Are there any other major things you guys want to bring up? Or?
Wow. Amazing.
That's crazy.
Well, this was super fun to be able to talk to you. Thanks so much for us on.
Do you have any questions for us? Anything on your mind?
What's the specific sect or brand or flavor or denomination, I guess you guys call yourselves?
New Church.
Denomination's probably right.
Yeah. So the denomination we are is formally called the General Church of the New Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
But the wider faith practice is called New Church, or also sometimes called Swedenborgian, because a lot of the doctrine we draw are from the spiritual and philosophical writings of this guy, Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a scientist and then theologian in the 18th century.
Wrote some cool stuff.
Wrote some dope stuff about heaven, about spiritual life.
Okay.
It's tight. A little plug right there.
Google them up.
So do you guys have like a podcast or a website or anything you guys like to plug? Or
Yeah, so we, the two of us, host the Spiritable podcast. That's just Spirit Able podcast, and we're up on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you want to go and find podcasts.
YouTube, where's our video?
Oh
podcast.
yeah, we do a video podcast on YouTube. There's a sneak peek of our set right here. I don't know if you're showing video or not.
Yeah, they can see you guys. Yeah,
Oh,
your
nice.
light in the middle is a little bright. I don't know.
Dude, I know. We were trying to fix that beforehand.
It's the problem with the web. Catch it a lot, but we're.
Yo, it's me, Ben, the producer. Remember that I'm around? Yeah, I had a lot of trouble generating this whole.
Oh, geez. Oh, there's
thing,
another guy.
so-
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up?
Yeah, I remember.
He's the producer.
All right,
He's the one that's been
I'm gone.
emailing you.
If you
So, yeah,
if you're
in this
ever
current-
desperate, or because changing obviously like a center light like that without doing new stuff can be hard. I know you can buy gels, like you can buy stuff like this to just cover the
Yeah.
light. It might look a little bad. I don't know if you could set that up, but it can. It'll definitely dim the light.
You could definitely get something underneath of this bad boy. We like the aesthetic though.
Oh sure.
Yeah, true. Anyway, yeah. So we've been doing the podcast for.
Hit us up.
Yeah, so
Comment any questions you
if
guys have.
if you're interested in anything, any of the people watching right now, you can go and find us on YouTube and feel free to comment on our YouTube channel. Any questions you have, we're going to respond to all of them.
We try to get tons of different types of people on the podcast. Like we had a psychedelic Buddhist guy on. We had some like shaman lady on one time. We had a bonsai artist.
Some shaman lady might be a little dismissive.
Okay, well, you give her the more appropriate title.
Which one are you talking about?
The the mystic fortune teller is what
The Catholic one or the other one?
the other one.
Okay.
Anyway,
yeah,
we
I
get
don't
lots of
know.
different people
Lots of
That's
different
because
people.
we
Good.
think just there's more to be gained from sharing and being willing to change for better ideas. So I really like some of the stuff that you were saying, Destiny, and I definitely have things to think about. And I appreciate your worldview and ability to talk about all this stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, I basically find myself, I respect anyone who takes the time to think about the right way to live in the world and then lives that way. I feel like that's respectable no matter how it differs in religious beliefs. So thanks for being open and willing to share that. I had a good time.
Yeah,
Hope
definitely.
you did too.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Richard on the left, and then Lucas on the right. I appreciate
Got
it. I think your YouTube channel is linked in my chat, and then people can always find you. If you ever want to have another chat or anything, feel free to reach out. If there's like a current event or some particular topic you want to chat about, yeah, I'm always down for it.
Ooh, awesome. That'd be fun.
Awesome.
That'd be fun.
Cool.
Cool.
All right, Destiny, have a good one, my man.
Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
a lot,
thanks
guys.
so much.
You guys have a good one.
Yeah.
Like if I were to be like, oh, like I've got this friend Triax, he kind of acts like an N-word sometimes. Like that makes me cringe almost as hard as hearing the actual word.